Imagine 4-rotor noises. What is up, Rad Potential YouTube? Welcome to today's video. We got the slide throttle. Super stoked to get this thing installed on the car, but there is a significant amount of modifications that we've got to do before I can install this beautiful piece of aluminum right here. So this is a 4-barrel, not a Holly, ginormous slide throttle. Well overkill for the street rippage that we're going to be doing with this car, but we're going to run this thing and it's going to look sick. So here's a little close-up cinematic action of the slide throttle. Just imagine some super cool B-roll shots of me spinning this thing around, or you looking at it on a table. I'll just go full Cirque du Soleil with my arms. Whoop, slid shut. So this thing's super neat. Basically, it's like 3 kind of levels of aluminum, or 2, the top and bottom, 1 with the piece in the middle. This piece right here, you know, opens the doors to awesome noises. So, pretty stoked. The only issue with this is that it hits my alternator. So let's take a look. So looking at this engine from the top down, you can see I've got the aluminum intake manifold bolted on there. Y'all saw it in a previous video. It's a beautiful piece. Y'all also saw we're real close to the alternator right here. And then I told you in that video that the slides are bigger than the lower intake manifold. So if you notice here on the left, since I'm holding this, I'm not going to point, but those bolt holes to the edge of the slide there where the idle adjuster is approximately like 2 inches. If you notice down here, the bolt holes to the edge of that aluminum plate is like 5/8 of an inch. So there's a good bit of overhang on either side. So as I set this down in here, notice how much bigger the slide throttle blades are than that little aluminum flap. You can see that we don't even really line up that well with the holes, and that I'm overhanging a bit. So 2 constraints here, the alternator and this pinch weld on the firewall. My goal is to modify the lower intake manifold. I'm going to cut the flange off of it and re-weld the flange such that the slide throttles are living about right here. So we're going to roll it over. This thing's actually heavy, so look at me quivering holding this, but about right there, which gives me alternator clearance. Honestly, it's going to kind of look a little nicer with it rolled over. It's just going to be a little funky with the fact that the intake manifold, if we'd have put the slides up here in the first place, then we could have pitched each one of these lower runners, could have just rocked those back, versus now you've got these lower runners coming straight, and then I've got some aluminum tubing that matches the diameter of that hole, and I'm basically going to be welding this on here, tipping it over, and then putting that flange back on. So, albeit, you know, it's going to like magic and stuff is going to happen, and me being a fabricator, which is going to be great because I get to learn a little bit. But the only thing that's not too fun is that it would have looked way cleaner with less joints welded into the manifold, because now I'm going to have a joint right there past where the 2 little runners collect to the big runner. So it's going to like collect, and then there's going to be a weld, and then it's going to roll over. Hopefully I can get it in one shot. So 1 shot, 1 opportunity, 1 piece of aluminum to just make this work. It does look super sick sitting in here vertical like this. It's just, everything is so simple about this 4-rotor. You would think that it's a super complex swap and super intimidating. And yes, the 4-rotor is very expensive. And I know I saw some comments that y'all want to see, like, what's a budget breakdown of being able to 4-rotor swap your car? I don't know that I necessarily want to ask Johnny how much he's got into this thing with just the 4-rotor swap, but maybe over some beers at Deals Gap, we'll get him to tell me the exact number, and then, you know, I'll try to get his permission if I can share that with you, or at least like a rough estimate. I mean, I know how much I have spent time and parts to, you know, do all the ancillary stuff to put the swap in the car, but I still don't have like a concrete number on just how much the engine costs, the intakes, the slides, the headers, and all of that. So it would be cool, though, to know. But for now, we have to modify this piece of sexy automotive jewelry, and it's got to fit with the alternator. We can't not have an alternator. There is actually a 3-rotor car that came up for sale. A guy whom I met at Deals Gap last year, his name is Nigel, and his 3-rotor FD actually had the alternator like slid down over here lower with some cool billet bracket that went in here, and there was like an idler pulley here. I was very intrigued seeing that car. It actually came up for sale not too long ago. I don't know if it's sold, but that alternator setup was super trick. So I don't know if that would have worked on the 4-rotor, but if we could put the alternator just about anywhere else, it would not interfere with the intake. And as far as custom pieces, the intake's already custom, so we might as well make that more custom because the serviceability of it won't change if I modify it. It's still a one-off piece. Stock water pump housing, little spacer, and one custom bracket versus a full custom overhaul of the front accessory drive. So let's be Mr. Rad the Fabricator for a little bit. Before I can cut the aluminum tubes to mount the slide throttles here, I've got the slides mocked up where the hood will close. We've got ample room to put some sock filters on each inlet there, and it's going to be semi-practical to run a tube at this angle here. So this aluminum plate, I've got to cut it off. That's the next step. We're going to cut this piece off, and then from there, I'll be able to put a pipe from below the plate to where the plate will be mounted to the slide. So it's effectively going to be this same angle or something similar. It's just that this plate will be over here and I'll have more space that way. What I did to give me an idea of the angle is just simply took this piece of cardboard and cut it to where it fits in here nice and flat. So the thing that's interesting is this isn't simply just a bend along the perpendicular axis of the lower intake manifold. The slide hole is also offset back. So this is going to be a bend in this axis, but also a bend in this axis. So it's going to be a little tricky to kind of, I really don't want to do it out of two pieces, so it might look a little funky, because I think having a somewhat sharper edge through here is going to be better than having more welds, pie cut pieces in here, because it's aluminum, so the welding of aluminum is just a little bit more bulky than like stainless, where you can lay it in like a nice tight smooth bead. Not too fired up to have to do this, because I do feel like this is just a wee bit outside of my pay grade, but you know, that's how you level up your pay grade, is do stuff that's outside your pay grade, higher. So let's cut this up. Well, that's what it looks like with the flange chopped off. Take a nice view in there. Man. Hurts my heart to cut this apart. Write that in a country song. Now we gotta fix this piece, which it looks like these are just a little bit of an oval and my tube is just a little bit small. So my guess is that this piece of pipe right here didn't entirely fit perfectly into that flange, and it was just, the flange was like laid on it and then just welded around it. So there was a little bit of a gap, considering that this fits into the flange nicely. So that'll make doing that a little easier, but I'll probably do some creative hammering on the end of this to flare it out so that it fits nicely for this aluminum. On the aluminum filler neck, I had a nice tight gap, so you know, my welder didn't complain that the gaps are too big, but I would assume on aluminum you probably still want just as tight of a gap as you do with stainless. So we got to make sure this stuff fits real nice, because it's going to make my welder happier. But effectively, we're going to have some sort of a contraption about like that going off of there to then pick up that other tube where the ITBs go, you know, tubes. I wouldn't call me a master fabricator yet, but we're getting closer. Pretty stoked with how this has turned out. This is still just semi-mocked up. I've got to go in here and clean up these edges here, but all the tubes fit. The tubes are in there. Let me find one that's loose. Okay, here we go. So this is what it looks like. Little complex angle here. Fits up in there, rotate it down, fits into the bottom, just like that. So I'm going to grind this edge down. So I'm going to mark all of these with some marks so I know, 4, 3, 2, 1. Draw them in there so we know exactly where they go, the height of this. Take all this out of here. Clean these edges up here. These edges aren't too bad. We'll clean the edges up on that flange a little bit. And then I'm going to mock it all back up again once I have the edges cleaned up. I think what I'm going to end up doing is kind of hammering the lower intake manifold because it's just a tad bit bigger than this. So kind of going to hammer this down and then take these tubes and flare out the edges a little bit just to get these gaps a little bit tighter. I'm overall super stoked with how this is laid out in here now. So it clears the hood. I know you can see it does stick up just a little bit past this ear, but as you go further back in the engine bay, you have more space. So this clears that, which is a huge win. It's probably pretty tight, but I can close the hood and I don't have any witness marks or anything on it. So that's a huge, huge win right there. Throttle cable will be down there, so the bracket and everything is under the trumpets there. In addition to, I've got to set up a TPS sensor, which I will show you as well. This is what's really funny is I could be like, hey guys, check out my TPS sensor, because the new microphone setup, I don't have to be 6 inches from the camera to be talking. The main issue with using a slide throttle body setup like this is figuring out a TPS sensor. So we're not drive-by-wire, we're going to be drive-by-cable, and I need a way to turn a linear action into a 5-volt reference for my Haltech Nexus R3. So I looked up shock travel sensors and I wanted to try to find the shortest one. I'd initially thought about using some sort of an arm. If you look at some marine like boat stuff, they have an arm actuated TPS. It's basically as simple as a shaft mounted TPS, just with a radius, sort of like a lever arm attached to it. So that would work. It would get me the throw I need, but that is going to travel in an arc. So it's going to be a little tricky to set up on my perfectly linear slide throttle, right? So perfectly linear though, shock travel sensor. So this is a Rife Sensors Motion Raceworks shock travel sensor. This is the shortest one they make. It has a 1 3/4 inch throw right here, and it's about, I think it's like 8 inches long, fully extended, or like 7.875 or something like that. And you're 1 3/4 shorter. So this piece here is going to also mount up underneath the slide throttle. This end will connect to the throttle actuator arm. Basically, it's just like a T-handle that you move back and forth, like grabbing onto a saw handle. And it's going to give me my throw. The only issue with this, and it's a street car, remember, so we don't necessarily need all of the horsepower that this slide throttle is going to give us, is that the throw of this sensor is about 1/4 of an inch less than the throw of the actual slide itself. So what that means is at 100% TPS, this is going to restrict the slide from opening all the way. So instead of having a perfect circle barrel, we're going to have, a section of it that's still closed. Now, those slides are massive, okay? So I don't think that it's necessarily going to restrict our peak power that much. We're also very limited by our stock front cover and stock oil pump. So I'm curious to see when we do get to the dyno in this project, does having that extra bit of slide make that big of a difference if we're not running out of oil pressure up there? Well, it's sitting in here under its own weight in some lovely green 3M painter's tape. Everything is marked multiple ways. Very nice, tidy, clean. I'm trying to figure out a way that I can sort of build this thing like on a workbench, because like right now, obviously, it's not hitting the alternator, it's not hitting the firewall, it's not quite at the proper angle that I want, but I've marked it so that I can just kick it back a little bit so you can kind of see like the marks in here. I just want to take this and tip it up, just, not as cool, super cool. Like you just that extra couple degrees there. So I've got some straight lines marked on everything. So, but I think what I'm going to do, I don't really have a good way to fixture it, Like I wish I had the ability to weld aluminum, because then I could tack this in place and it would be perfectly good, and then we could just fully weld it. But you see, I don't have the ability to weld aluminum, so the best I can do is painter's tape and Sharpie marks. But what I'm thinking is, if I look vertically, the most important thing is the front to back, right? So the alternator can stay here. And if I look vertically down this, it's about 3/16 of an inch behind the intake flange. So this piece is that way, which is a good thing to note. Like obviously the intake flange is the front of the engine and the alternator just barely extends behind that. So that's that 3/16 of an inch. I've got like an eighth of an inch clearance between this alternator and that slide throttle there. So, this part of the alternator isn't that important. It's just the boss where it mounts. So I could just take a flapper disc and grind that boss down if it hits after we weld everything together, right? So what I'm worried about here is, this apparatus has to make the trip to the fabricator, the guy who can stick aluminum together for me, without coming apart or being wrong or being in the wrong spot, which is a fun challenge to have. But overall, I could not be happier with how this looks and how it came out. Like I said, I am not an expert fabricator. I guess I'm getting there. I'm getting better. There are things that I wish I could have done a little bit better and a little bit tighter fitting and just a little bit nicer of a piece. But I think for like the sex appeal factor of this whole intake manifold, I think it's going to look really nice. Even with having the extra welds here at the green. Like if it would be way nicer if it was just one piece. From here down to the two runners, we had to modify it a little bit. So otherwise, I'm pretty happy with that. It's going to look really nice. It's going to be a little tricky. That's why I'm trying to tip this up a little bit. It's going to be a little tricky to fit that shock travel sensor under there. But the nice part about it is you're not really going to be able to see it. And ultimately, I'm real happy with where my pulsation dampener lined up because it almost lines up. It's kind of into rotor 3, but it's almost in the middle, which is a win because if I put a filter on there, it's still going to touch the pulsation dampener, but it just won't touch it as much. Like I'm really envisioning, if you've seen on my rotary truck way back when, which you probably haven't seen it, but if you imagine like a little pod filter, singular filter per runner, that's kind of what I'm imagining here, 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 and here, like 4 individual filters sticking out. It's sort of the easiest. These trumpets are also giant, so these aren't your typical, Weber-sized trumpets. My biggest Weber is 50 millimeters, so the trumpets on that Weber aren't that giant, but the size of this trumpet is easily, it's a unit. It's probably 3 inches across, so I don't know. We had to figure out a filter for it. You can't have a street car without an air filter. I drove my Bridgeport Weber with trumpets open because the filters really slowed the car down. Like if I put those pod filters on there, they're just pretty restrictive. And y'all would think like, just put screens across it, keep the big bugs out. Well, ultimately on the street, you're really breathing in a whole bunch of brake dust, road dust, just the fine particulates. That's what you really need to stop. Like on the track, obviously, if you just have a big turbo guard on your turbo, you're just trying to keep the rocks and the debris and all the big things that are going to tear your turbo up out of it. But in our case, we really need to like keep all the semi-truck dust and rain and like all the stuff that could potentially get in here out of our engine. You want your engine to not get internally sanded when you drive through a dust storm. But overall, I'm very happy with it. I think it looks really good. I've got the wiring harness all laid out, separated, and I just have to basically terminate it. I've went through the diagram. I know everything I'm going to be using. I'll put all of that. I've already started filming the video, but that'll all be in kind of the wiring video so you can see that whole harness come together in one video. Basically coming from the Nexus flying lead harness that you can buy from Haltech. So other than that, that's going to be the end of today's video, guys. I am trying to the more stuff I film to make videos, the more stuff I get done. So I'm just trying to film as many videos as I can, upload as many videos as I can, document this process because it really keeps me motivated and out here just cranking stuff out. And it keeps me on task too, because then I'm like, okay, intake manifold modification, boom, video. I'm going to do all of that, film it, ready to go. Upload it. Next step, wiring. Boom. Do all that. Next step, fire this thing up, which is going to be the best. So, pretty stoked. Pretty stoked. But with that, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys for watching all the videos. Hope you all enjoyed the RX8 video from yesterday. I've really been enjoying driving that car as 70 psi compression as it is, or 80 or whatever it made, and 86 horsepower to the wheels. It's kind of nice not driving the big bad dually around every day. So, go check out the other videos on the channel. Definitely smash the subscribe button if you want to learn more about rotaries. If you want to learn about all the other projects I got going on that are coming up here in the future, then definitely go check out the Patreon. Super good group of guys over there, and I would love to have you guys support. In addition to the patrons get first dibs to the merch. After Deals Gap, I've got t-shirts to take to Deals Gap. They get their leftovers, and then eventually I'll be able to get the website up and get merch available to you guys to purchase as well. So go check out the Patreon. I would much appreciate it. But with that, thank you guys so much for watching. Drop any questions in the comments below. Keep it rad. Shoo! It's crazy. So got the slides in the mail today. Literally. Today, got the slides in the mail. It is currently, my camera isn't going to run out of batteries before this clicks over, but it is currently nearly 2 in the morning tonight. Here's a little, if you can see the background behind there, a little hint at some secret projects on Patreon, but the patrons know what's up. Cool stuff. Dually's got new rubbers on it, looking a lot less max, a lot more caddy. It's time to go home. Time to go home. I'm going to go cold start my yellow RX8 and then turn the heat on in my heated seats and then drive home with my blown out rear shocks. Peace, guys.